Water History, episode 166, Wednesday night. Richard, what's going on?
We're really getting to the life of H.L. Mencken. We can't have him as a guest because he's dead, but his impact certainly lives on in libertarian and anarcho-capitalist spheres. So he's a hero to many of us. And it just so happens that, according to Grok, I sound a lot like him.
Mm. And we wrapped up our demonology series, did the second Dark Notes, kind of going on a run here, and now we've got this other topic where it's like a first maybe biography topic in a little while.
Certainly a biography topic in a little while, but yeah, in this case, yet it's posthumous biography or analysis.
I haven't asked you this yet. I wanted to save it for right now. Opening day is tomorrow for Major League Baseball. I don't know if you know this. How many White Sox games will the Richides be at?
Zero. I will say, however, although I might take that back because my fandom has moved on to greener pastures. Kind of a free agent as a fan at the moment, but I am going to take the kids to a Cubs game. They've never been to Wrigley Field. They've been to what are they calling it now? The Rate, um, which in a city of violent crime, calling your field the Rate, it always sounds rapey. It's like the rape. I don't
Yeah,
know if that's what comes to mind.
or
But
murder.
yeah, hey, welcome to Murder
The
Stadium.
the crime rate.
Yes, it was, by the way, it was just announced this week again that according to the FBI statistics, Chicago is again, for the 13th year in a row, the murder capital of the United States. What a what a distinction. Um, so they will be going to a Cubs game. They've been to the Rate Field, before that Old Comiskey, before that US Cellular Field, before that Guaranteed Rate Field. I knew what was the other name for it? I guess I got all of them. But yeah, they've been there a ton and to minor league baseball games, but never to Wrigley. So we'll see that.
The over-under for wins is 53 and a half. I don't know if you knew this.
And
It's
everyone's talking about how you should take the over. I'll tell you what, bold prediction. They're going to win maybe two or three games more at most than they did last year. So I would definitely be taking the under.
so you got them at around, I forgot what the final number was. I think it was 44. So
Right. Yeah, because they won 41
right.
last
And
year.
they didn't exactly get
No,
better.
well, excellent point. They got worse. Their roster is clearly worse in terms of overall talent. So now you might say that they got younger, and the dead weight of some of those really underperforming veterans is gone, but they have Mike Clevenger as their closer. Good Lord.
Right.
Well, but I will say that I'm willing to go see some other teams that I'm interested in when they come to play the
Okay.
White Sox.
Okay. So I mean that counts. That is a big reason the last 3 or 4 years why you would go to a White Sox game though.
Absolutely. So I'm very intrigued by, I really, this is going to sound weird because I always had in my prior White Sox fandom, a absolute hatred for the Detroit Tigers. But I love their team with Tarek Skubal and Jackson Jobe and these guys that are really Kerry Carpenter. I mean, they got some Riley Green. They have some stars, and their rotation with Casey Mize is their fifth starter. I mean, they're going to be good. They're going to be really good. So I'm looking forward to seeing them. I'd like to see the Cincinnati Reds if they come to town. Really, pretty much any other actual major league team
Right.
that
So the
has to
quadruple A.
by through no fault of their own is in the same baseball league with the White Sox, so they have to play them.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're welcoming the break from actual competitive foes.
Yeah. It's gonna be a long summer again to be a White Sox fan.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
But another year where the ownership might change. And we're a year closer. Every year we're a year closer to the ownership changing. That's how I
Sure.
look at it. That's my white pill.
Right. Yeah. Who's going to die first, Jerry Reinsdorf or Pope Francis?
I feel like you've been putting that out there for a little bit.
Me? I've never said that.
I think you have.
Really?
Yeah.
Mix myself up with some other brilliant guy.
Well, let's get into H.L. Mencken, who you were inspired to talk about today. Do you want to give any background there?
So there's this trend going on Twitter where you ask Grok, its AI feature, to examine your tweets and your posts on X, and then say what famous person you most sound like through your postings. Both in what's amazing about AI is it can look at not just the language that you're using, but assess the overall arguments as well as the tone, how short your composition is in terms of sentence structure, how you write, and so all the stylistic as well as content related material. and it spit out for people who I admire. I was looking at people doing this on Twitter, and Daryl Cooper of the Great Martyr Made podcast, he did it, and Grok said he sounds like H.L. Mencken. To which Derek Cooper exclaimed, "Fuck yeah!" He was extremely happy, as you should be, to be compared with the acerbic but altogether truthful tongue of and pen of H.L. Mencken. So I just decided, well, I might as well give it a try, as many people were doing. And sure enough, you want to share the findings? I shared them with you.
H.L. Mencken, Robert Zoll,
Rob Thomasol.
Thomas Zoll. Sorry about that.
That's okay, Roy Westerman.
But I was thinking about this too with how powerful that prompt is. Have you ever taken one of those personality tests? 16 personalities, they've got all the letters and stuff.
You're talking about the Enneagram?
Yeah, but there's an actual website called
Oh,
16personalities.com
okay.
where you take a personality test and then it gives you the four letters
Right.
ENFP,
Yeah.
ENFJ, whatever.
All right.
And then it'll give you celebrities that you're like or public
Oh,
figures
okay.
that are also that personality.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, this kind of does it for you.
Yes. Without having to input all that information.
So you get these two guys. You want to talk about H.L. Mencken.
Right.
Tell me more.
Sure. Let's provide a brief biography or some biographical notes of him, and then we're going to do something novel, and that is I've selected six quotes, very famous and well to the point and direct quotes from H.L. Mencken that tell us a lot about his worldview, his general philosophy, any ideological positions that he espoused. And they also happen to be eloquent. He was just a master of the English language. So, Henry Louis Mencken was a Baltimorean. Is that how you call people?
I
How
was
we
going to
call
ask
people?
you. I was going to ask you.
Yeah, Baltimorean.
Baltimorean.
Yeah, maybe. Well, he's from Baltimore. He was a journalist, essayist. He was a satirist, a polemicist, cultural critic, and scholar of just general English literature. He was a what used to be known as a public intellectual in many ways. And the reason why, and the public intellectuals were pretty numerous and out there. You would be able to easily identify in the at the turn of the century, the Gilded Age, and then even into the Progressive era, and even post-Progressive era, 1930s, 20s, 30s, 40s. A lot of people who would identify as public intellectuals. They were often journalists, but they were opinion writers. I think of, for example, the famous economist Henry Hazlitt was certainly a public intellectual. Our friend Garrett Garrett was a public intellectual. Their writings, just like Mencken's, were syndicated. Mencken tended to write his main column for a newspaper, the Baltimore Sun, but as I said, became so popular that it was his works were syndicated. He wrote a number of books and contributed to a number of journals, and he was, to be sure, just this what we would call today and was referred to back then as a polymath, just an overall genius. And it seems as though ranging from economics to politics to linguistics, literature, the guy just seemed to have a strength in waxing poetic on all of these matters, history. So he was just a very gifted individual and contributed mightily to a libertarian and truly traditional American outlook. So he was a vocal and very caustic critic of the New Deal and government programs and interventionism. He himself was an atheist, and so or I suppose he would call himself a strong agnostic. So he did have commentary, however, on whether different faiths and traditions and theologies rang true to him or not, whether they appeared to, in an authentic way, bolster, support, and advance human nature and individuals existing therein or not, and the general human spirit. He was born in 1880 in Baltimore and died at the age of 75 in 1956 in Baltimore. So, one of Baltimore's most famous sons. And it's amazing to think how the things he criticized in terms of governmental interference and intervention, well, it kind of over the decades fell on deaf ears in his native city, to be sure. Excuse me. So, any other questions about just the biographical features of H.L. Mencken, Charlie?
I'm curious. Obviously, you got him on the prompt. Who does Is there anyone that reminds you of him today that we
Thomas
know?
Sowell certainly reminds me of him. Just again, someone who's a polymath, is a genius in a wide range of disciplines and subject matters. I think too, are you familiar with Mark Stein?
Mark Stein. He's like not. I assume you're not talking about like the basketball beat writer.
No, 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 I know that guy. This is not. Mark Stein is a Canadian, British, American commentator. He wrote the book America Alone and then After America. He was the one famously sued by East Anglia Professor Michael Mann, I believe, who came up with the hockey stick theory within climate, and Stein called him out, and Mann took him through the ringer in the British courts. Uh, but another brilliant guy, commentator, just courageous and fearless in his way, the ways he was able to deconstruct and is still able to deconstruct horrible argument and unsound ideological positions, and really elaborate upon the truth and the beauty of it. Stein's a theist, so he has that going for him above Mencken.
Hmm.
Those are the two men that most stand out. I would also go so far as to say that someone like Gene Epstein reminds me of H.L. Mencken, but Gene doesn't have the acerbic tongue that Mencken did, whereas Mencken could make you feel about that big to just a tiny figure, like the size of a Monopoly board piece, just because he was able to humiliate you through your espousal of an argument that he found to be erroneous or fallacious. Uh, Gene Epstein is much more scholarly and almost charitable in his refutations of people with whom he disagrees. I mean, you could, a great comparison. In fact, the man who just popped into my head immediately is Lou Rockwell. Lou Rockwell, president of the Mises Institute. Oh, no, he's not president, but founder of the Mises Institute. Tom DiLorenzo, another man that kind of reminds me of Mencken. But the way that Lou Rockwell, I first heard Lou Rockwell in the Tom Woods podcast, and this is back in maybe 2013. That was the first time I had heard of Lou Rockwell. Sadly, I was in the dark about him. Oh my gosh, to read Lou Rockwell, and yet another man who can just eloquently describe and define and elaborate upon anything from he wrote a great little pamphlet called Why Austrian Economics Matters. I have it at work. I leave it on display for people to read if they are so inclined. No one's ever picked it up, but it's there anyway.
Yeah.
And then he just is so voluminous and scholarly in his writing and contributions, but a man who could just destroy bad arguments, just destroy bad philosophies. Yeah, Lou Rockwell is definitely an H.L. Mencken figure.
Okay, so what do you think about someone who might be listening to this saying, "Well, this guy's an atheist. You guys are always
Mm.
talking about Catholicism. Why are you getting so pumped up about sharing a Grok answer
Huh.
that you resemble him?"
Well, sure. In a truly Thomistic, that is to say, a la Thomas Aquinas sense, truth is truth, even if the vessel is, or the conduit is flawed. So if it indeed, their ideas and contributions, I'm not going to use the term stands the test of time or stand the test of time, but can be borne out and proven to be means by which we arrive at greater truths about the human condition, about metaphysics, about if we're talking about the physical sciences, things like physics or chemistry or biology or you name it, genealogy or genetics, whatever it might be. Well, then you use those figures. Thomas quotes Averroes and Avicenna, two Muslim scholars. He cites frequently when he gets to the subject of divine predication, Moses Maimonides, a Jewish scholar from the 11th century, I believe, in 10th, 11th century in Alexandria. He holds one of the highest honors, that is to say, Aquinas, throughout the Summa Contra Gentiles, and his other works for Aristotle. Aristotle was a pagan, and he quotes other pagan scholars. So for Thomas, God's grace could flow and inspire the work and be behind the work of non-believers, and the non-believers either ignorance or resistance to the totality of truth as extant and alive and transformative in the divine Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, doesn't preclude them from contributing to our own understanding, our own examination of what is true, good, beautiful, the transcendentals. Excuse me.
I think we should get into the quotes. I'll pull up the first one.
Well, I want to do the first one from the Woods book.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the longest quote, and this is one which Charlie is very familiar because it comes from a book by the aforementioned Thomas Woods called 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask. And I always assigned at the beginning of my US history courses, Charlie was subjected to one of them, the introduction to this book. And the epigraph to the introduction of this book comes from H.L. Mencken himself. So, want to read this one and get your reaction, Charlie. Uh, Now that you're not 16, but you're advanced in age, obviously.
23. And
Oh,
by the way, I got my first grays in the beard.
come on.
I'm not even kidding. Located my
At
first couple
23?
at the ripe age of 23.
No,
Ouch.
just pluck those out.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Okay. So here's go. Here it goes. The truth, indeed, is something that mankind, for some mysterious reason, instinctively dislikes. Every man who tries to tell it is unpopular, and even when, by the sheer strength of his case, he prevails, he is put down as a scoundrel. H.L. Mencken. So hearing that now,
Yes, I
7,
remember
8
this. Right. I remember hearing this because this was like syllabus week. This
yes.
was one of the first readings we had to do.
Mhm.
So this is at the beginning of the year. I'm just
All right.
coming in.
You're still wild that I let you go to the bathroom whenever you wanted.
That was a big day. That was a top 5 day in life when we talk about long-term impact, I think.
Mm, yeah.
The day I realized permission is not needed. That's a
Yeah.
big shift. But anyways, I've told that story a bunch.
Nor should have ever been conceived to have ever been required.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was probably super naive at the time.
Mm.
I'm not gonna lie, it's probably first week of class, had no idea what I was getting myself into here.
Right.
Um, Probably didn't envision writing a book with the guy assigning it, and was just not hanging on too tight to the Mencken at the time. And
Yeah. So it's got to hit you differently now a little bit, no?
oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. What are
Frontal
your
lobe's a little more developed now.
That's right. Although it stopped developing soon, right? Or soon it's going to stop developing for you.
We still got a year and some change, but I think that should scare people more than it should be a concern that
For
I still
sure.
have a year to go. But
Yeah.
anyways, it's it's interesting because I think about relating it to the church, how we're always in pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the pursuit of the truth. It's so interesting how Mencken talks about how it's actually not something that we're naturally inclined towards. In the
Mm.
same way that we have an inclination towards sin, we
Yes.
have an we have an
Concupiscence.
we have an inclination to uh, we have an inclination away from the truth or to shy away from the truth in the same way that we might experience, other inclinations towards sin, right? So that was an interesting connection that I was making on my own, but that was my big takeaway. What do you think?
Yeah. Your points are well taken. That the truth is, well, it often when you discover it. In fact, I can't think of an instance wherein for a substantial truth or revelation, whether it be divine and scriptural, that type of heightened truth that's divulged to us or shared with us, or something more, I suppose, daily or ordinary or but the significant truths, well, they come when you discover them, all of them come with a requisite demand. It's almost as if when you're hit with something that is so, well, let's call it essentially or existentially true in either case, philosophically speaking, the truth demands a response. And the response might take you far afield from where you're comfortable. And then you have to contend with if you're going to shout it from the hilltops, or as in our Lord's words, take the bushel basket off the lamp of the truth. Yes, you might feel more actualized and you should feel more actualized in discovering it, but you're going to encounter resistance from those who still wish to stay in the darkness for a variety and multitude of reasons, as you seem to indicate in and begin to enumerate because of fear, because of an unwillingness to change. The truth can often demand and require us to alter relationships, dynamics, alter our worldview to be sure, and alter how we approach people, our interactions. So when that happens, it's disconcerting. And I think that's what he was pointing out. And when it is discovered, as we're talking about the topic and context of it being discovered in history, well, when you speak out against the assumed and accepted narrative, rather than I had this naivete, by the way, when I was maybe even your age and beginning when I was your age, I was at University of Chicago. And there was a more of a, especially at that time, an accepting environment. In fact, you were rewarded for coming up with what we might call or identify controversial or outside the Overton window takes or perspectives. So I thought when I matriculated into professional life as a teacher that, or just in my public life as I'm, debating with people in bars or meeting new people in the social scene in and around Chicago and beyond, that people would be, well, at least intrigued by novel or controversial opinion. Per H.L. Mencken, and consistent with what his take is here, I didn't find that to be true. People either don't want to hear it, they're ignorant of the kind of surrounding information that would require them to enter in the conversation. So they feel, what would be the word? Disabled in that sense, disengaged, voluntarily so, and then angry if you hit on a subjective third rail of theirs. So the case in point would be if someone went along believing that Native Americans were true ecologists, that because they had names like Turtle's Run and Eagle's Wing and Hawk Feather, that they were all great preservationists and concerned about the ecology and the land and resources which were available to them. And that's clearly not the case. They were oftentimes, the historical record shows, really brutal in terms of their treatment of natural resources, often exhausting them to the point of eradication. Slash and burn techniques were used oftentimes in farming because their methods were so primitive. So if you were to bring that up and even cite evidence, you could probably take people with whom you disagreed to the actual site, show them the evidence, and then make a sound argument, an incontrovertible argument, in point of fact, of those things. They're still not going to accept it, and then the anger comes out when you persist on
Yeah,
in hopefully your elucidation of the truth.
right.
There are consequences.
Let's get to quote two.
Yeah, let's go ahead and see that one. I read the first one, so you read the second one,
Yep.
okay?
The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary.
Does that quote
1918.
doesn't it ring so true in
1918.
2025 though?
I think I'll read it
Yeah,
just
read it
here.
again.
The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary.
What are the imaginary hobgoblins that are so apparent to us today or affect us today?
Well, I was thinking about COVID that
Oh,
whole
that's number one.
time reading it.
I mean, that's just the formula, isn't it? And then to Dave Smith and Robbie Bernstein's everlasting credit when they talk about this, and I think quite reasonably refer to this all the time. What happened after? Just think about the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. You have an emerging right wing movement, the Tea Party, that wants to dissect what's going on in government, that saw the cause of this as an unholy alliance and cabal, the actions of a cabal of a central bank and global policy, the the fiscal policy of the United States that obviously, given the laws of economics, caused such strife, created a bubble within the housing market, then because of the ineptitude of the Federal Reserve, only worsened the crisis that followed. So there's this anti-governmental, let's get back to very basic, small Jeffersonian government movement. Then You have the Occupy Wall Street movement. A bunch of lefties recognized that major corporations had colluded through rent seeking with the federal and state governmental apparatuses, all to the detriment of middle class, poor Americans. And they saw that radical change needed to be made to ensure some equitability within the country. They, the people on the Tea Party looked at the people in the Occupy Wall Street movement, said, well, all of their anti-capitalism thing is a misdiagnosis, but hey, they're calling for eradication of this unholy alliance of, special interests and the government. So are we. So then what happens? You bring in Barack Obama and you bring in all Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, and you get all these people to start tweeting about, how we're what's really the existential threat to the United States is racism. What's really the existential threat is nothing to do with the bankers. It has nothing to do with the globalists. It has nothing to do with the WHO or the World Bank or anything like that. It has to do with that we're all homophobic. And so and Dave Smith says this so poignantly, and you could just look it up. Whereas before, major corporations, financial institutions, and the like were purposefully and intentionally, with great care, apolitical. JP Morgan all of a sudden has a gay pride float in the gay pride parade in New York City. See? So gone is so therefore that possible alliance that could have been forged between the right and the left, recognizing the criminality, the waste, fraud, abuse, graft, thievery, and then when you get into the war question, the murder of so many things taking place, for all these were once they recognized that people could or were starting to see the true culprits behind the cultural and financial and economic divide that existed within the country, well, then they just what they do? They just fomented these non-issues and made them into issues.
Let's get to number three. Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. We've talked about this a bunch.
There's our H.L. Mencken, Hans Hermann Hoppe quote. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thoughts? Your take on this?
we've talked about it a bunch. The two lions and a gazelle deciding what's for dinner. I don't know if those are the right animals, but
That works.
yeah, this is, I was thinking about this actually the other day. The idea that we deserve who we vote for,
Mm,
that cliche.
yes.
Obviously, we don't vote, but I actually am starting to believe it a little more.
Yes, but doesn't that foist upon us kind of a collective guilt?
I
I
think
mean,
so.
but that's not good.
Well,
Why should you and I be?
I'm not saying it's good that I believe it. I'm
Oh,
just saying that collectively it is true. Like we are still part of us, if that makes sense. I know
this sounds very
that's
social justicey.
collectivist. I
This
know, I
sounds very
know,
social justicey. I don't like
I
see
know
where you're
this is
going.
I know this
Keep
is
going.
collectivist, but I was thinking about, when we did that episode about uh I forgot what the topic was, but it was after the comedy show when Dave was asked the question about what should an average person do,
Mm, mm,
and
mhm.
he was pretty charitable in his response, and we talked about how he was almost too charitable in his response, and the word that we used is you need to be crashing the net harder.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
the term I used, and I think we titled the episode "Crash the Net."
Yes.
I almost feel like I could be doing more,
Okay.
even if we're doing all of this and not voting and doing this. I think that there's almost another level that we can take this that we're not going.
Sure. Uh, if I could take off or extrapolate from what you're saying here and relate it back to Mencken's quote, especially when you don't have something like direct democracy where we're voting as a majority on singular issues or programs or what have you, right?
Right.
When you have a republic and representative democracy, what I suspect Mencken is alluding to or getting at here is that you have this inevitable when you go from the collective to a singularity, and you allow the singularity to have undue inordinate power based on the rule of the majority of the collective, then that by its very nature invites injustice and coercion. Because if you go to treat individuals as in their participation or their politics having power through the voice of a collective, but by its very nature, you can't have a what a kind of schizophrenic or multi-personality singular representative who can switch off and switch on in a truly representative fashion the voice of the minority. And when we're talking about the attempts of the framers of the Constitution, what they're adamant about, and Madison in particular was vocal about in the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention, was we have to avoid a system, what they were constantly attempting to create, really out of thin air and hadn't been successfully tried and then been successful before, was having a system that was both reflexive to the will of the majority, but given the multiplicity of voices, also constrained in its ability to collude together, the majority of people colluding against minority groups or special interests that didn't agree with the majority. That's the dynamic of the structure of the Constitution if you really dive into it. In this, H.L. Mencken echoes for me Lysander Spooner, saying that if by the 1840s and 1850s, in fact, way earlier than that, we're talking about events like the Whiskey Rebellion or the Judiciary Act of 1789, if you have a written political constitution, which is the law of a land and of a confederation of peoples, even in this case, and states, and right out of the gate, it's not functioning in the way it was designed, well, then you have a constitution of no authority, right?
Right.
If it's not functioning in the way which it was created or for the purpose for which it was created, namely to yes be reflective and reflexive toward, responsive toward, if you will of the majority, but always respective of and protective of the voice, the rights of the minority, which the Constitution fails over time and time again. Well, then that's why it's easy to see it has no authority. And so when Mencken says, you know, people who pine for democracy are always going to get it good and hard, that's the reason. Because you're trying to sculpt a masterpiece of the functioning of a society with bad tools and bad material. You're starting out with a foundation that's sand.
Yeah.
And furthermore, that's why when I think Mencken would smirk at all the politicians who constantly refer to democracy, and all they truly mean when you dig down deep is what they and their cadre of friends and political allies believe is right. That's always the democratic system. Yeah. I was reminded today just of this episode that just transpired, wherein the Signal IT episode where a text stream was relayed to journalist Jonathan Goldberg, and there's all this hullabaloo and controversy about, well, they're talking about national secrets and military strikes in Yemen and how irresponsible and dangerous all of this was, the incompetence abounds, and that's all, in fact, point of fact, true. But in the Senate hearings, at one point, Senator Mark Warren of Virginia, as I was watching this clown show, as it always is in Congress, grilled Tulsi Gabbard. He said, or no, he was grilling John Ratcliffe, who's the current CIA director under Trump. And he said, this is wild. Don't insult the intelligence of the American people by continuing to say that line. To which I think H.L. Mencken would say, don't tell me what to do. I can insult the general intelligence of the American people because the American people, in their intellectual capabilities, deserve to be insulted because they've handed over and ceded the rights of their education, free exercise of their mind, voice, critical thinking to government apparatchiks and the institutions they run.
But don't you see what I mean? That we kind of deserve what we get.
Okay, I see that, but I'm uncomfortable with that phrasing simply because democracy is not wieldy. It's not something that you and I are called to, nor should we be responsible for being capable of molding. It's too unwieldy. It's too uncontrollable. So, back to the his first quote about those who are truth tellers, and they're immediately deemed as scoundrels or labeled as scoundrels. Well, unless you're willing to peddle falsehoods that are attractive to people and then eventually nudge them back toward the truth after you've lied and stated their desire for political red meat uh, and and propaganda that only states their current positions and affiliations or dispositions, well then you're never gonna get that point. In other words, you could be Demosthenes, you could be H.L. Mencken, you could be Lysander Spooner, you could be Fyodor Dostoevsky or Friedrich Nietzsche. You could have that level of brilliance, and the mob is going to treat you as an outcast. I mean, think of all of the great figures of history who were great because they uncovered and espoused, they uncovered for people and espoused the truth. I mean, we could go from Socrates to Christ to St. Paul to all the martyrs of England, Japan. Well, they were great because they knew the truth. They eloquently and passionately defended and expounded upon it, and then they were offed as a result. So, is that when you say we get the government we want,
Deserve.
we deserve? Did Justin Martyr get the government he deserved?
Right. He did not.
Okay, but you're saying we. Okay, so let's bring it further. Did Malcolm X get the government he deserved?
So you're talking about, I think we're talking a little bit past each other. I'm talking more so about individually what we could be doing. And I'm not talking about like obviously we're not voting, but when you say you said something like the general American intellect is so dumb that they handed all of these people, the power, right?
Okay, but some people didn't. Some people didn't. They didn't just
Yeah,
acquiesce. They didn't just
maybe it's just blackpilled to say that like we deserve this.
okay, where I would say something along the lines that I would agree with you wholeheartedly is the people who persist in working in the system, yeah, and think that they can reform it hook, line, and sinker or by every thread, they get the government they deserve. But you and I don't get the government we deserve. The government we
Yeah.
deserve is no government because that's what we deserve. That's what we have argued for. This is what we have, that for which we have advocated.
Yeah.
And this is it, I would go so far as to say that this is one of the beautiful effects and consequences of taking the red pill. Because if you take the red pill, notice even in the Matrix, it's not just that Neo's knowledge makes him foreign to the Matrix. It's that once he takes the red pill and his understanding and let's call it enlightenment, his wisdom is strengthened and I suppose activated. Let's use the word activated. He physically is moved outside the system. You see? So I think your line that we get the government we deserve is perfectly fine if you persist in wanting to take the blue pill. But if you take the red pill, you've disespoused yourself from that. You divorced yourself from that. That's one of the beautiful
You
consequences.
don't think that's a cop out?
No, because just like just like I'm going to use the Matrix analogy yet again, it's not as if Neo once he's physically and mentally uh essentially too outside of the Matrix. That doesn't mean he doesn't go back in and try to awaken more people or save more people from it. Is he responsible for the persistence of the Matrix? No, he's warring against it. Does Morpheus get the government he deserves?
Yeah. Wow. I love that movie.
The sequel and the third one were disasters, but go ahead.
The third one is so bad.
Oh, oh,
Every normal man must be tempted at times to spit on his hands, hoist the black flag, and begin slitting throats.
talk about not holding back, huh?
Yeah, hopefully we don't get flagged for this one. But he did say that, 1919.
Uh-huh. We didn't say that. H.L. Mencken, who's dead, said that. What's your reaction there to that one? I love that quote though.
Every normal man must be tempted at times to spit on his hands, hoist the black flag, and begin slitting throats. Um, I don't want to be too supportive of it, right?
What's up to you? It's your take.
I do think that's part of the any masculine drive, though. Like
Okay.
that, there is a channeled rage that you could feel, especially towards societal norms.
Right. Now, what's the black flag in reference to?
Well, the black flag's in reference to anarchism.
Yes. Okay. So
So
this,
mostly,
right. He's raging against the progressivism of his day, the impositional government, which is always antagonistic toward people's freedoms, their rights, their
okay, this is what the quote, I should have said this because
autonomy and agency.
I was thinking about this earlier. Sorry to cut you off. V
Yeah.
for Vendetta is
Right. A
that
movie I
movie is
haven't seen. Can you believe that? I know,
we
but
might
it's
have to do.
fantasy, and I know you're gonna say, "Well, what do you think the Matrix is?" Okay, yes, understood. I just never seen it.
What do you mean it's fantasy?
Yeah,
Do you
very good.
not? No, no. Do you not watch fictional movies? Is that the deal?
I tend to, for example, Game of Thrones, I think is stupid. I just I now I always get made fun of because even mutual friends of ours, they've known this tendency that I don't like sci-fi a great deal. Star Wars is just a joke to me, and I make fun of people who like Star Wars all the time.
History is too entertaining for you to find
Yeah, that
anything
sometimes
else.
it's not just sometimes truth is stranger and more interesting than fiction. It's almost all the time, right?
Okay,
So
sure.
so that's my disposition. Now, don't make fun of me because I actually love, like for example, Spider-Man. So there is clearly I, eh, let's just call it inconsistency here.
Right.
But I'm just trying to figure out why I dislike fantasy and sci-fi so much. Oh, and then, for example, the inconsistency goes all the way to one of my favorite movies is Minority Report. Have you ever
I
seen
haven't seen
Minority
that one.
Report?
No.
Oh gosh, that's a movie that you really should watch. It is sci-fi, it's futuristic, but it's excellent, just excellent. In fact, if you were to tell me or ask me what is the best Tom Cruise movie ever, it's Minority Report.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so
Noted.
I'll watch V for Vendetta.
Okay.
You'll watch. Maybe we should do a Dark Notes on both.
I think there's definitely a Dark Notes on V for Vendetta,
Okay, okay,
even though that would almost be predictable.
okay.
But
So go. Let's go back to this quote about slitting throats and the black flag and spitting
mhm,
on your hands. What do you suppose the spitting on the hands is a reference to?
I don't know.
Okay, well when you work, sometimes you get a grip on something. Yeah, you spit on your hands. Yeah, to get
Mhm.
just as a pitcher when it's cold. We were
Yeah.
talking about baseball earlier. Will be allowed to lick his fingers to get a better grip on the ball. So what is he doing? He's securing a banner or a standard, and he wants to keep it tight to his grip. Well,
Mm.
that's what you do. It also it makes me think of kind of an oath that you would take with someone. Like the old when boys were gross, when you're like little, and you go, "All right, you're my buddy. I promise to be loyal to you," or "I promise to beat up Jimmy down the street because he made fun of your mom," or something like that. And they go, "All right, we agree," and you'd spit on your hands and shake. Did you ever do that?
I don't remember doing that. That sounds
Oh,
like something I could have done.
well, outside of River Forest, this is how boys acted. You know.
Please. But I get the point.
Yeah. On the other side of town, on the other side of the track,
It was a big pinky swear. The pinky swear
it's a little
would
take.
take you a long way. It was. It
Yeah.
was.
Pinky swear with your buddy.
Maybe that's why testosterone levels are down just off that alone.
Too much pinky swearing. Not enough spitting on the hands and shaking it. Damn it.
Yeah,
Exchange those germs.
we used to be a society. Maybe
Yeah, yeah.
that's why
Uh-huh.
COVID happened.
So, of course, the slitting of the throats, Charlie. What do you think of
Yes.
that? Too much?
Uh, I mean, I
Here's
don't think he's being literal, but in
here's
some
where
ways
I
he
would
is.
say, in an odd way, it almost seems like a contradiction. So it's a paradox in this case. He's speaking in a very Christ-like way. And what I mean by that is it's the opposite. It's the flip side of turn the other cheek as a radical instruction toward what to do when people transgress against you. This is the flip side. It's hyperbolic, very vivid and violent imagery, sling throat, and he's speaking, I think, very metaphorically here and saying this is what the response has to be a rage that would almost allow you to ponder, consider the slitting of the throat of someone who was to aggress in such an egregious and total manner against the good, against your liberty, against your family, against those who you hold dear. That's where I think he was going with that. That's why I appreciate it.
So you're not taking it literally.
I'm taking it more metaphorically and in a hyperbolic, exaggerative way. Just as, of course, any sound exegesis of Christ's command to turn the other cheek requires examination and providing parameters and limitation to the instruction because it's clearly meant to be hyperbolic. Just like cut off your, remember the instruction in Matthew, cutting off your hand. Origen took that too literally. You know that joke?
Plucking out eyes, not
No,
hands.
Origen didn't, his major sin was not of the, well, it actually was in the sense of the eye, but he didn't blame his eyes for the lust he was feeling. So he blamed his gonads.
Right.
And so he castrated himself.
Yeah.
Major reason why Origen's not a saint, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, that's the primary reason.
I'll have to read
His
into that.
theology tended to be a little bit subordinationist, which we could get into another episode. But other than that, he was a master on prayer, on spirituality, uh on revelation. Exegete. He was a great exegete. Oh, brilliant. His treatise on it's entitled On Prayer. It's in the original is in Greek. Obviously, he wrote that in Greek, but it's sublime, just unbelievable. I did a whole paper on it in seminary. Great.
This one's probably my favorite.
Okay.
The older I grow, the more I distrust the familiar doctrine that age brings wisdom.
Hmm. Experience does not necessarily translate into insight, does it? Sometimes that's important because we tend to have this very facile and simple idea that, well, if we're more experienced in something, we have a greater to totality of understanding of it. But I would suggest that human life often betrays that point because our incapacity to appreciate the totality of even the simplest of things and artifacts and you name it, to certainly the more complex things, such as, uh, I mean, try to wrap your mind around a God who cannot suffer and is eternal, who becomes incarnate and thus suffers and is limited in his human nature through eternity, right? Vis-a-vis eternity. So there's a great line from Saint Clement of Alexandria: the eternal became temporal with the incarnation,
Yep.
and the impassible, that means unable to suffer, became passable. I love that line. So there you go. Wrap your mind around that one.
Yeah. I think I like that quote better.
Ah,
But
plus,
obviously, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. Sorry.
What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just going to say, oftentimes the routine of how we engage with both God's creation, physical and certainly metaphysical, can, in that habit, lead us to a sense of comfort and or an unwillingness to appreciate or delve further into something just because we're comfortable with what we know about it or our interactions with it, whether it be a person, thing, mode, cultural element, institution, whatever it might be. And that's as far as we're willing to go. I see this a lot in terms of uh, how comfortable people are with the phrase that is just basically the mantra and motto of Chicago. It is what it is. Yeah. I mean that's just the articulation of I'm fine with even acknowledging that there's criminality all around me, but oh well, the Chicago Teachers Union and the fact that the Chicago's reputation is as the murder capital of the United States, maybe the world by this point. It is what it is. So,
I was thinking more along the lines of risk tolerance. Risk
okay,
tolerance just goes down
sure.
as even just thinking about times when I was younger where I might have
Uh,
done something and it was super risky, but it ended up working out. And even today, I'll look back and think that was kind of nuts.
yes,
Why did I don't know if I would have done that if it was today.
sure.
And I don't think that's necessarily wiser. I don't think
No,
that,
so true.
I think
That's
that sometimes, this was actually on a business podcast I was listening to, but the guy was mentioning how we always tend to say, or we always tend to ask the question, if you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self? But a lot of the times, our older self should go back and ask our younger self for more
which
advice,
what
just
how
because,
inform me of how I should live now.
right?
So true. That's a profound insight because
We play it so safe and
yeah,
we care a lot more
yes,
about stuff that we didn't used to care about.
right. And this is something that Thomas talks about in the Summa about when he's defining freedom and human agency. He says it's a misunderstanding. He gets this from Aristotle. It's a misunderstanding to equate human freedom with having a plethora of choices. We tend to think of that. Having the ability to choose from 31 flavors is much better than two. Or I remember, you ever hear of Beverly Hills 90210?
Yes.
Okay, so Beverly Hills 90210, of course, everybody watched it back then. But there's an episode where Dylan, Luke Perry's character, goes into the Peach Pit, and which is the famous kind of cafe that they go to. And he's kind of considering who he should date, Brenda or Kelly. Brenda or Kelly. One's a hot brunette, well, not as hot as Kelly, the blonde. And in the 50s styled cafe, the Peach Pit, someone puts on the jukebox the song, Did You Ever Have to Make Up Your Mind? It's not always easy and not always kind. You know that tune from the
Yeah.
50s? And he's sitting there and he's kind of proing and conning both girls. And you could see that having the choice was not freeing, right?
Mm,
Because I equate this to, so he was wasting his time and not having the pleasure of being with one of the women because he was stuck in inertia of having the choice.
right.
Yeah. And fearing, as you point out rightly, that he was going to choose the wrong fashion. It's similar to when I was teaching theology, and I would talk about what human freedom, how it's to be exercised. It's both a state and an act. And so, for example, do you think that Mother Teresa, when she woke up each day, was truly free? And it's pretty clear that she was free. But the thing is that how was she free? She was free because of the singularity of her purpose. She didn't wake up in the day and say, "Oh, I have to go shopping," or "Ooh, I'm wondering if I should, finally make the splurge for a new pair of shoes on Amazon," or "Oh my gosh, I have to pay the mortgage," or something like that, or "I have to, go and finally ask this dude out," right?
Right.
Because her religious state, she woke up because of the singularity of her purpose. She was actualized, and she was actualized to help the poorest of the poor in Calcutta. And that's a freedom for excellence that comes from and is eased. It's more, it's simply less difficult. Life is if you have that singularity of purpose without the multiplicity of alternative avenues.
Last one. Puritanism, the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy.
Oh, I love that. Does that not sum up Calvinism in the perfect Mencken nutshell?
And we talk a lot about how there's a Puritanism in our Catholic Church,
Cardinal George's famous quote.
and it's so true when you just
Mhm.
think about, man, you have such an issue with somebody just being joyful.
Yes, right. Envy is at the core of Calvinistic Puritan Protestantism.
Yeah.
So, and it's wildly, if you read something which is albeit fictional, but yet a genius work like Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, you see what the true everybody the sin of Hester and the lust that she shares with what was Dimsdale, yeah, that's the diversion. Everybody's oh gosh the sin of the flesh and all that, but the the deadly sin, the mortal sin to which nearly every character in that book, in many ways aside from Hester, is guilty of is envy. Dimsdale's envious of Chillings, or I'm sorry, Chillingsworth is envious of Dimsdale. He's envious of Hester. He's envious of Pearl. He's envious of everybody. And so too are all the other people who are unable to exercise this choice, albeit vicious, to go off and do their own thing and cheat on their spouses and abandon this fledgling Massachusetts Bay Colony.
You want to talk about a town where Puritanism reigns supreme?
Broad lawns, narrow minds, a lot of envy.
Here it
Here it is.
is.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
We go to your gay suburb now.
The People segment. Meanwhile in Oak Park. Brought to you by
Trinitine Brewing.
frustrations boil in Scaman versus Parakkat president's race. This isn't. It's going to be over in a week.
My gosh. Is
We've
she
got
she is an unattractive woman.
we've got.
She could eat an apple through a picket fence.
Guess what day their election is.
April 1st. April Fool's Day.
We're all the fools.
Yeah. But according to Charlie Westerman, we get the government we deserve.
Here we go. Presidential candidates Vicki Scaman and Ravi Parakkat feel burned by each other after tough campaign. Editor's note. Oh my gosh, we got another editor's note. This story has been
Correct. It gets- How many editor's notes have we read over the couple last weeks, few previous weeks, where they have an editor's note that is awful?
This is
grammar errors?
not for the
Spelling
people
errors.
that don't have the video up and are just listening. We've had two editors' notes in the last 3 years, 2 years. One of them is this editor's note, and I'm going to read it exactly how it's written. This story has been correct. Darnell Johnson's name. Wednesday Journal regrets the error.
Oh gosh. That boy's Virgil. This writer's Virgil.
Vicki Scaman and Ravi Parakkat describe each other's behavior on the campaign trail the same way. Quote, that's not Oak Park. With the
They're complimenting each other. I don't get it.
With the months-long campaign now less than a week from the finish line, both candidates for village president are saying that their opponent has not lived up to the village's values. Oak Park politics watchers have observed, including us, have observed.
I was going to make fun of that group, but you and I are,
Yeah,
are elemental members of that.
we're here
clan.
every week. Oak Park politics watchers have observed a notably tense campaign for the village's top job as a long-term rift between the two village leaders plays out in public.
Ooh.
Both
They
candidates.
just started making out, like hate make out.
Jeez. I can't even think about that. Both candidates, Parakkat, a current village trustee, and Scaman, the incumbent board president, agree that their relationship had been fractured before either announced plans for seeking election. Here we go.
Ooh, this is some good tea here.
Quote, there are fault lines here. The two have been on conflicting sides of several key issues, including 2023's local migrant crisis and discussions of Parakkat's idea to potentially develop the former, more concrete site into a, quote, sustainability incubator in 2022.
Oh, good.
Parakkat said that when Scaman called on sustainability professional Darnell Johnson to comment on his Moore site proposal during a board meeting, he felt he could no longer trust Scaman's leadership. Quote, 30 minutes before the board meeting, she calls me and says that she is bringing Darnell Johnson into this discussion because he's got a perspective, Parakkat said. That was the start of me realizing, from a governance perspective, that there are fault lines here, and I've seen that play out again and again with every subsequent decision. Scaman said that Parakkat's reaction to Johnson's involvement went beyond the pale. Quote, he was abusive to me, she said. In that meeting, I think I cried. It was a
Get out of it. Get out of the kitchen.
it was a Zoom meeting. It was a Zoom meeting, so I don't know that anyone noticed. I thought that I was trying to be helpful in bringing Darnell Johnson in to give us this advice, and Ravi thought I was trying to take over his idea.
Which, although we don't know the details surrounding this, sounds exactly like what she was trying to do when you just invite a sort of surprise contributor to a village board meeting, and he's going to speak about this alternative plan for something that Parakkat had been working on. Is that not the definition of taking over the plan, or just trying to undermine it? The beginnings of undermining it?
Well, that's what she's saying. Ravi thought I was trying to take over
Right.
his idea.
Well, that's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Yeah.
That's what she's doing.
Right. Yes. Yes. Okay. The more concrete site on Harlem Avenue was eventually sold to a developer, but is now in foreclosure.
Wow.
Quote, you can't take back some of these words. Scaman said she's felt attacked by Parakkat in a way that she hasn't seen occur in a village president's election since she's been involved in local government, and that the criticism hasn't been in good faith or fair to the job she's done as village president. Quote, in 2021, it was two women running, and the biggest attack I received was my opponent saying that I was status quo, which is extremely mild compared to today's situation, Scaman said. This is the first time since I've been paying attention to local politics, which is 20-something years, that there's been the intention to spin stuff. I don't like to say my opponent is lying, but I think he's been creatively misleading. Quote, he doesn't seem to think there's anything wrong with how he's putting information out there. He seems to see it as he's got ambition. I see it as he's being opportunistically misleading. So we have different levels of integrity in our guts.
Sounds
Parakkat,
painful.
Parakkat said he feels like he and his supporters have been the victim of toxic treatment by Scaman supporters, both online and in person. Parakkat said he's heard from a business which told him been told to take down the Parakkat sign in its window. He said he has also heard from another resident who said she was afraid she'd lose her neighbor's help with childcare if she publicly supported Parakkat. Parakkat also said he was deeply hurt and personally offended by a comment in a private Facebook group that labeled him a misogynist and a Hindu supremacist. The comment came in the course of a back and forth between Scaman and a resident on March 13th, discussing the village board declining to adopt a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
We talked about that when it happened,
We
didn't
sure did.
we?
Parakkat was especially hurt that Scaman had reacted to the comment with a heart emoji. Oh, we got emoji warfare. Quote, this thing really hurt me personally. He said, it is really disheartening for somebody who's come from the other side of the world to come into this community and then to be in this position. I'm here because I believe in Oak Park's values. After several days of consideration, Parakkat posted a screenshot of the comment and Scaman's emoji on his campaign Facebook. Scaman originally commented on the post accusing Parakkat of a smear campaign, but edited her comment and apologized.
Oh, that would have been great if he just would have said, I'm here to support Oak Park's values and may Brahman rule over all of you. May Shiva destroy your bad attitudes.
Quote, I do not embrace name calling. I was responding to a question. The rest of my comment was not helpful, and I apologize in parentheses, she said in her edited response. Parakkat, commenting on the overall tone of the campaign, said, it forgets the fact that we are all neighbors, that this is a small community, that our kids go to school together, and you can't take back some of these words. You can't undo these actions, Parakkat said. Those divisions that are driven in the name of an election cycle can create lasting damage. That is the problem I see with the tone of this election. Here's the last quote. It's not what anyone seated at the board table wants to do. Scaman said Parakkat has built the core of his electoral strategy around misleading voters about what the forthcoming village hall renovation and construction of a new police station will cost, mischaracterizing her and other current trustees' positions in the process. Scaman maintains it is her will now and the will of the entire board that the entire combined project be completed for as close to $100 million as possible,
As possible.
and that she would reject a proposal from the architectural firm working on the project that comes in too high.
The project bill is too damn high.
Quote, to say village hall, but not include the words police department into the math and let people believe that $80 million of it isn't for a new police station, that it's $150 million for this legacy project for village hall. It's instilling fear in people, Scaman said. To claim that one of the candidates is going to so irresponsibly throw money at something without the proper analysis, the spirit of that is not Oak Park. And it's not what anyone seated at the board table wants to do.
What characteristics would the actual spirit of Oak Park have?
Yeah.
Bob Moran, get your pencil ready.
Economically frugal.
Right.
Parakkat has said Scaman will push for a $140 to $150 million project to rebuild Village Hall and build a standalone police station on the patch of green space across the parking lot from Village Hall. He said that with construction and interest, that final costs are likely to balloon to nearly $200 million. He said that Scaman is the one misleading voters by flip-flopping ahead of the election. Quote, people are changing their positions for the convenience of an election that's around the corner, he said. Even then, at face value, $100 million translates to $180 million by the time you're paying interest plus everything else that goes along with that. You're still looking at a $200 million project, and I don't subscribe to that. Part of this conflict stems from different interpretations of the significance of the July 5th, 2023 board vote that set the stage for the next 2.5 years of back and forth between the village and its architect, and much of the bitterness of this campaign.
Think about how long ago that was.
I know. That night, the board was to determine how the village would plan to move forward with providing the Oak Park Police Department new accommodations, as the board had reached consensus that officers were working in abominable conditions in Village Hall's windowless basement. Man, this is a long article. The board considered 5 options that night. They ranged from demolition of the current Village Hall and construction of a new municipal building and police station to a new police station and renovation of the Village Hall's lower level to building a new police station and not renovating Village Hall. Price ranges presented by the architectural firm stretched from $70 million to $138 million.
Well, you got to read that next paragraph.
I know. I just wanted to catch my breath
how long this
for a
goes.
second there. Costliest option, demolition and new construction, won out that evening with Scaman and trustees Lucia Robinson, Corey Wesley, and Shibuke and Yia supporting the proposal for a new village hall alongside a brand new police station on the same property. The vote set the vision for the project, although trustees described that preliminary step as a limited action that gave room for the village to react to resident perspectives, as Robinson articulated that night. Quote, this discussion is limited and just moving to the next step, Robinson said. In Scaman's view, that's exactly what's happened as the board has pushed its architect JLK, which is a different firm from the one that provided the cost estimates in 2023, to bring the cost of the project down from that 2023 estimate. Demolition of the village hall has also been taken off the table in favor of renovation. Parakkat still believes that selecting the most expensive option on the table that night damned the village to overspend on the project and is still a key example of Scaman's, quote, poor governance.
Zing.
When the firm's representatives were last in front of the board in December, their projected cost for the entire project was around 120 million. They were
Oh,
supposed
that's
to
just scandalous.
they were supposed to speak before the board again on March 18th, but that discussion has been pushed to a lame duck session after village staff wanted more time to review the JLK proposal.
And keep their fingers crossed that Skaman's elected so they could spend 200 million on
The voters will have to go to the polls without the benefit of those insights.
it. Interesting. Again.
Huh.
So do we get the government we deserve still, Charlie, when they can't even have insights
I
into
think
what
I think Oak Parkers. I think in a way Oak Parkers deserve this.
Yeah.
So,
Is there another story or is that it?
oh, there sure is.
Oh boy, here we go.
Oak Park to honor Transgender Day of Visibility.
Oh,
As the village offers public support, questions about what more can Oak Park do
see, I'm in
persist.
favor of community controls like in the Middle Ages where we'd have a transgender day of invisibility or
As the
parading and mocking.
as the village offers public support, questions about what more can Oak Park do persist. That's the subtitle.
Yikes. Look at this ghoul.
Supporters packed Oak Park's village board chambers on March 18th as trustees passed a resolution that will honor Transgender Day of Visibility on March 31st. The trustees heard from several community members about what the resolution meant to them, including a statement from Mike Johnson, the parent of a transgender child who had moved back to Oak Park so that their daughter could live in a more welcoming community. Quote, my daughter is absolutely thriving now that she's back up in Oak Park,
Yeah,
Johnson
because
said
her
during the meeting.
psychosis is being fed and approved.
We had a place that we knew we could return to, but a lot of people don't know about Oak Park. Transgender Day of Visibility has been celebrated internationally on March 31st since 2010. It is meant to, quote, celebrate the lives and contributions of trans people while also drawing attention to the disproportionate levels of poverty, discrimination, and violence the community faces, according to GLAD. There will be a Transgender Day of Visibility celebration in Oak Park this year at Scoville Park from 3 to 5, Sunday, March 30th. This year, the occasion will be the backdrop for many protests and rallies in the United States, including one scheduled at the Federal Plaza in Chicago on March 30th and another at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. on March 31st, as President Donald Trump's administration has taken a firm stance against support for transgender and gender non-conforming people.
Uh-huh.
Trump signed an executive order on the first day of his new term, ordering that the federal government only recognize two sexes and eliminate any materials that, quote, promote gender ideology. As a result of this and other executive orders, transgender people haven't been able to get passports that correspond with their gender identity.
Oh God, God forbid.
Transgender veterans have been denied coverage for gender affirming care, and mentions of transgender people have been scrubbed from federal websites. In this climate, Oak Parker Aaron McManus, one of the organizers of the Scoville Park event, asked the board on March 18th to consider adopting another resolution that would declare Oak Park a, quote, transgender sanctuary city. Quote, it's a signal to people in this community that may be on fence about is it okay to be accepting of trans people, McManus said. We want to move in people who will really celebrate that. Several cities around the country have taken that step in recent years, including Kansas City, Missouri, and Worcester, Massachusetts.
That's Worcester.
Worcester, sorry. McManus, who is non-binary, said that such a resolution could potentially raise.
You know how he got non-binary? Because he was sitting on the fence too long. No?
I get it.
Okay.
So that such a resolution could potentially raise the village's profile in a way that would bring people into Oak Park looking to relocate from places that pass anti-transgender legislation. Quote, everybody deserves to choose what kind of future they want, they said.
No, that's not true.
It's important to emphasize and reframe the idea that it's the fundamental human rights of self-expression and self-determination that are what are framed as trans rights. Oak Park Village President Vicki Scaman told Wednesday Journal she would support a proposal declaring Oak Park a transgender sanctuary city. Quote, I think there's additional sense of urgency with the rhetoric coming out of the federal government, Scaman said. I think you have to respond to how painful that is. For some trans youth, it's life or death.
Oh, remember we were talking about Christ and H.L. Mencken's use of hyperbole in a most intelligent and efficacious way? Dumb people use hyperbole and exaggeration in idiotic and destructive ways. It's life or death. That people not be recognized as being transgendered. Ugh. This is the whole concept of the trans murder thing that people are the genocide of trans people that even good libertarians like Spike Cohen fell prey to in 2020. I mean, come on. Eh. Recon Not recognizing someone else's psychosis does not mean you're killing them. Or recognizing it and saying it's crazy is not killing them either.
It's life or death.
It's life or death. Yeah.
That's the segment.
Boom.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay?
What do you think, Charlie? What
Good
would H.L.
episode.
Mencken say about transgender sanctuary city status for Oak Park?
I don't know. He would come up with something good. He'd be a good guest on Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Oh, can you imagine? Oh, that biting tongue of H.L. Mencken destroying.
All right. Well, went a little longer, but
Yeah,
covered a
it
lot
was
of good
worth it. It
quotes.
was good. Good. It's a worthy tribute to a great man, commentator, H.L. Mencken.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
Peace out.
Peace.